Welcome, and thank you all for coming. I was going to say, especially in this braving the soggy and particularly unseasonably cold weather, but it seems to have warmed up in the last hour or so. I'm Eileen Galuli, and as the Executive Director of the Heyman Center for the Humanities, and on behalf of Francis Negron-Montaner, who's the Director of the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race, but who unfortunately cannot be here tonight, it's my pleasure, my great pleasure, to welcome you to this year's Artist at the Center event with Maxine Hong Kingston. Before I introduce Ms. Kingston and her interlocutors, let me take a few words to explain what the Artist at the Center is. A few years ago, Francis and I decided to have both our centers, that is the Heyman Center and the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race, team up once a year to bring to Columbia a celebrated artist whose work addressed questions of race, ethnicity, and indigeneity. We saw this as an opportunity for the Columbia community and the general public to engage in conversation with those who have transformed ethnic identified practices into cultural resources for us all. Recent artists at the center have included the playwright David Henry Hwang and the novelist Junot Diaz. The format is somewhat flexible, though as this evening, it will include Ms. Kingston's reading, I understand, first off, and then talking about her life and her work in conversation with Dorothy Ko and Marie Lee, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. We anticipate that the conversation and the reading, which will touch upon the importance of gender, ethnicity, immigration, and race in Ms. Kingston's work, will last till about 7:20 and be followed by another 20 minutes of questions and answers with the audience. And I believe Ms. Kingston's kindly will sign books after the event? Yes, great, okay. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce both the interlocutors and then Ms. Kingston. Marie Myung-Ok Lee is the author of Somebody's Daughter, a novel, and another one on the future of medicine, which is forthcoming from Simon & Schuster. She teaches fiction at Columbia and was the Our Word Writer in Residence in the graduate writing program last year. She's been a judge for the National Book Awards and is currently a judge for the PEN E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Prize. Her nonfiction has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Slate, Salon, The Nation, and The Guardian. Dorothy Ko is a professor of history at Barnard College who specializes in gender and body in early modern China. Her current research focuses on women's artistry and skills in textiles, and her teaching interests include the history of women and gender in East Asia, feminist theories, and visual and material cultures. Professor Ko's research and scholarship have been supported by the Guggenheim Foundation, the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, and the American Council of Learned Societies. Her book, Cinderella's Sisters, was awarded the 2006 Joan Kelly Memorial Prize of the American Historical Association for the best book in women's history and/or feminist theory. Maxine Hong Kingston is a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley, where she is currently Senior Lecturer Emerita. She's a novelist, poet, an anti-war activist, and a teacher in the Veterans of War, Veterans of Peace project. She's the author of the widely acclaimed novel, The Woman Warrior, which was published in 1976 and which won the National Book Critics Circle Award, making her a literary celebrity at the age of 36. You can figure out how old she is. Her second book, Chinamen, earned the National Book Award. Kingston's books are widely taught in literature and other classes, and she's written additional books and has earned additional honors, including the Penn West Award for Fiction, the American Academy of Arts and Letters Award in Literature, and the National Humanities Medal, which was confirmed by President Bill Clinton, as well as the title Living Treasure of Hawaii, bestowed by a Honolulu Buddhist church. Her most recent books include a memoir titled I Love a Broad Margin in My Life, a collection of essays, Hawaii, One Summer, and the novel The Fifth Book of Peace. Please help me welcome Dorothy Ko, Marie Lee, and Maxine Hong Kingston.
Thank you for the nice welcome. And what I'm going to do is to give you a medley of 75 years of work, okay? And we're going to start with me at the age of 3. And here, when I was 3 years old, we lived on the second floor of our house in Stockton, and I had 2 grandfathers. Actually, they were great uncles, but we call them grandfathers, and my mother would. When we heard them coming, and they were coming with their stagecoach, driven by 2 black horses, and they had changed the stagecoach into a vegetable wagon, and they delivered their vegetables all around Stockton. And my mother would open the door of the window. She would open the window and hang me out the window, and she'd say, "Sing to your grandfathers, make them laugh." And so here's what I would say. Samgonga, Segonga, Nehoi Naya, Mahai, Cup Segyok, Yao Segyok, Nehoi Naya. I really wanted you to hear my first language. This is my first poem and my first language, because you can hear how different it is from the way I speak now, and you can imagine the very long journey from that village child language to today. So here is the translation. Hey, 3rd grandfather. Hey, 4th grandfather. Where are you going? Horseshoes clippity-clopping, 4 feet, then 4 feet. Where are you going? And then my grandfathers they would applaud and they would laugh. And I think, oh, that's it. I'm going to be a poet. That's what I'm going to do. You know, it is very different. I mean, the sound of the horses in Chinese, it's cup, 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 you know, the hooves. And then clippity-clopping, you know. Even the sounds have to be translated. Okay, so now we're going to 40 years later, we're going to talk about 40 years later, and that is, and the woman warrior comes out. Actually, it's more like 37 years later. And so next year will be the 40th anniversary of the woman warrior. And also it'll be my 75th birthday. And I just saw my publisher a few hours ago. They are planning a celebration. And so watch for that. You're all invited. You're invited. So then, so the woman warrior comes out, and I want to read to you some questions that I was asking of life. And I asked these questions at the beginning of this book, and so the questions guided me. So if I could answer these questions, then I would have a book. And at this time, as I'm writing this, I think of my audience as Chinese Americans. Chinese Americans, when you try to understand what things in you are Chinese, how do you separate what is peculiar to childhood, to poverty, insanities, one family, Your mother, who marked your growing with stories from what is Chinese. What is Chinese tradition and what is the movies? So I'm trying to sort out too, like, what are stereotypes and what is reality? And then toward the end of the book, and I'm not sure that I answered those questions by the end of the book, but I remind myself of what my responsibilities are as a writer. And I'm thinking about my ancestry and about my parents, and they are going to go, and what will I inherit? What I'll inherit someday is a green address book full of names. I'll send the relatives money, and they'll write me stories about their hunger. My mother has been tearing up the letters from the youngest grandson of her father's third wife. He has been asking for $50 to buy a bicycle. He says a bicycle will change his life. He could feed his wife and children if he had a bicycle. We'd have to go hungry ourselves, my mother says. They don't understand that we have ourselves to feed too. I've been making money. I guess it's my turn. I'd like to go to China and see those people and find out what's a cheat story and what's not. Did my grandmother really live to be 99? Or did they string us along all those years to get our money? Do the babies wear a Mao button like a drop of blood on their jumpsuits? When we overseas Chinese send money, do the relatives divide it evenly among the commune? Or do they really pay 2% tax and keep the rest? It would be good if the communists were taking care of themselves. Then I could buy a color TV. So then, maybe 30 years after writing that, I was very dissatisfied with the woman warrior. I was becoming more and more nonviolent and peaceful, pacifist, and here I'd written this war story, and I wrote the stories of women who were sword fighters and horseback with arrows and shooting, and so I was thinking, what can I contribute that's not a war story? And also I saw that I made lots of mistakes writing about Fa Mulan. And I left out that she was a weaver, and so she was Penelope, and she was Odysseus, the warrior. She was both a military general and a weaver, and I had left that out. And so I thought, okay. And I also, another mistake was that I told it in prose, whereas the chant of Fa Mulan is a poem, and it has the rhythms of weaving, and the sound of the shuttle going back and forth across the loom should be in it. And so I rewrote the story of Mulan as a poem. It begins with the sounds chick, 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 and to the Chinese ear, that is the sound of that shuttle this way and this way. And jik also has a meaning. So jik means to weave, jik means to knit, and jik means to heal. And here's another correction. The Fa Mulan is not just a war story. It's a coming home from war story. Chick, 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 chick. Fa Mulan is weaving the shuttle through the loom when news of the draft comes. Each family must provide one man to be a soldier in the army. Sparing her dear father the wretched life of a soldier, she disguises herself as a man and goes in his stead to war. With heavy armor and her hand-fitting sword, she fights wars. Her horse's hooves pound the earth. She cannot hear the voices of home. She is away long years and many battles, so long a time that her father and mother grow old and die. At the head of her army, giving chase and being chased, she suffers wounds. Blood drips red from the openings of her armor. Her army, chasing and being chased, passes her home village 6 times, back and forth past her home. But she cannot stop to place offerings on the graves. In terrible battle, General Mulan defeats an enemy, and the king proffers rewards. She asks to go home, the war be done. She takes her army to her home village and orders them to wait for her in the square. Indoors, she takes off man's armor. She bathes, dresses herself in pretty silks, and reddens her cheeks and lips. She upsweeps her long black hair and adorns it with flowers. Presenting herself to the army, she says, "I was the general who led you. Now go home." By her voice, the men recognize their general, a beautiful woman. "You were our general, a woman." Our general was a woman, a beautiful woman. A woman led us through the war. A woman has led us home. Fa Mulan disbands the army. Return home. Farewell, beholding and becoming yin, the feminine, come home from war. I am not quite satisfied with my translation because I wanted to be sadder. I think it sounds too heroic. Maybe that one line, the wretched life of a soldier, that one's good, but the rest of it just sounds so heroic. And the reason I'm thinking this is that Du Fu, over 1,000 years ago, he heard the chant of Fa Mulan. I know he heard it because she lived over 1,000 years ago. And in Du Fu's poems, there's a stanza that says, "Let me have a daughter rather than a son." This is a very unusual thing for a Chinese man to say. "Let me have a daughter and not a son. She will be married to somebody in a far village, and I will get to see her. But a son will be buried in a far-off grave. A son will be buried in a far-off battlefield." And but then think of how what a hard circumstance Fa Mulan was in, because they did have a girl, and she didn't get to stay home weaving, and she also had to go to war. So I have been interested in, from the very beginning, on the plight of soldiers. And And so I was, in writing China Men, I was thinking a lot about my brother who was in Vietnam. I had two brothers during the Vietnam War, but you know, only one brother has to go to Vietnam, and the rest of them are deployed to different places. And so I want to read to you the very end of China Men, which has some thinking about the brother coming home from war. In the Vietnam years, soldiers were very isolated because you came back home one at a time. When the brother took a cargo plane on standby home, CONUS, the continental United States, there were no other passengers. It was a plane especially to take him home. At night, in lonely parts of airports, he saw electric conveyors move coffins draped with flags on and off planes. A soldier stood guard in front of stacks of them. Mustered out at Treasure Island, he rode a Greyhound to Stockton. He walked the few blocks to his parents' house, in front of which many cars were parked. A party was just ending. Some of the guests were leaving. "He's back," they said, typically talking about him in the third person. "Well, so you've come back," said his father. "You've come back. You're back home," said his mother. The chicken still sat whole on the table. Pieces of the roast pork from the whole pig, noodles and lettuce remained. This was a very important religious party, a thanksgiving that he had come back home, more than personal, not a party only for him, and that was why they hadn't had to wait for him to have it. He ate the rock sugar on red paper his mother handed him. He ate the leftover pork. She hacked the white chicken for him. No, his appetite had not come back yet. He'd have to do more duty eating. 3 years after his return, the United States withdrew from Vietnam. For a time longer than that, the things people did seemed to have no value. Nobody else saw this, but his appetite did gradually increase. He had survived the Vietnam War. He had not gotten killed, and he had not killed anyone. After writing Woman Warrior and China Men, I just really had the urge for fiction. I just had to get out of the writing about real people and actual circumstances. I wanted my imagination to go toward other places and to make up people. So I'm going to read you the first paragraph of Tripmaster Monkey, his fake book. See, I just want to make sure you knew it's fake fiction, and just hear the big transition that I thought I was making from nonfiction to fiction. The first chapter is called Trippers and Askers. And, you know, that is so modern, such hip slang. And did you know it comes from Walt Whitman? Walt Whitman said, "Trippers and askers surround me." Maybe it comes from living in San Francisco, city of clammy humors and foghorns that warn and warn. Omen, omen, oh dolorous omen, oh dolors of omens. And not enough sun. But Whitman Ah Sing considered suicide every day, entertained it. There slid beside his right eye a black gun. He looked side-eyed for it. Here it comes. He actually crooked his trigger finger and bang, his head breaks into pieces that fly far apart in the scattered universe. Then blood, meat, disgusting brains, mind guts. But he would be dead already and not see the garbage. The mouth part of his head would remain attached. He groaned. Hemingway had done it in the mouth. Whitman was not El Pachuco Loco. Proof he could tell a figment from a table or a tree. Being outdoors in Golden Gate Park, he stepped over to a tree and knocked on it, struck a match on it, lit a cigarette. Whose mind is it that doesn't suffer a loud takeover once in a while? He was aware of the run of his mind, that's all. He was not making plans to do himself in, and no more willed these seppuku movies, no more conjured up that gun than built this city. His cowboy boots, old brown Wellingtons, hit its pavements hard. Anybody serious about killing himself does the big leap off the Golden Gate. The wind or shock knocks you out before impact. Oh, long before impact. So far, 235 people, while taking a walk alone on the bridge, a mere net between you and the grabby ocean, had heard a voice out of the windy sky. Laurence Olivier asking them something, to be or not to be. And they'd answer, not to be, and climbed on top of the railing. Fingers and toes roosting on the cinnabarine steel. They take the side of the bridge that faces land and the city, the last city, feet first, Coit Tower giving you the finger all the way down. Okay, now I'm gonna skip to me being 65 years old. And I think time is running out. And any moment now, who knows what will happen. I'm also thinking this because the book I was working on had burned in the fire, and I think how ephemeral everything is, including me, and including any inspiration. So I thought, okay, these prose books take me 10 years to write, every one of them a decade a book, and I can't do that anymore. And so I thought, okay, so I'm going to short, easy form. I'm going to do a short, easy form poetry. And so I started this book. I am turning 65 years of age. In 2 weeks, I will be 65 years old. I can accumulate time and lose time. I sit here writing in the dark, can't see to change these penciled words. Just like my mother, alone, bent over her writing. Just like my father bent over his writing, alone, but for me watching. She got out of bed, wrapped herself in a blanket, and wrote down the strange sounds Father, who was dead, was intoning to her. He was reading aloud calligraphy that he'd written, carved with ink brush on his tombstone. She wasn't writing in answer. She wasn't writing a letter. Who was she writing to? Nobody. This well-deep outpouring is not for anything. Yet we have to put into exact words what we are given to see, hear, know. Mother's eyesight blurred. She saw trash as flowers. Oh, how very beautiful. She was lucky, seeing beauty, living in beauty, whether or not it was there. I am often looking in mirrors and singling out my face in group photos. Am I pretty at 65? What does old look like? Sometimes I am wrinkled, sometimes not. So much depends upon lighting. A camera crew shot pictures of me, one of 5 most influential people over 60 in the East Bay. I am homely. I am old. I look like a tortoise in a curly white wig. I am stretching head and neck toward the light. Such effort to lift the head, to open the eyes, black, shiny, lashless eyes, talking mouth. I must utter you something. My wrists are crossed in my lap. Wrinkles run up the left forearm. It's my right shoulder that hurts. Rollerblading accident. Does the pain show? Does my hiding it? I should have spoken up. Don't take my picture, not in that glare. One side of my neck and one cheek are gone in black shadow. Nobody looks good in hard focus, high contrast, black sweater and skirt, white hair, white sofa, white curtains. My colors and my home, but rearranged. The crew had pushed the reds and greens and blues aside. The photographer, a young woman, said, "Great, great." From within my body, I can't sense that crease on my left cheek. I have to win compliments. You are beautiful, so cute, such a kind face. You are simple. You move fast. Chocolate chip. A student I taught long ago called me chocolate chip. And only yesterday, a lifelong friend told Earl, my husband, he's lucky, he's got me, the chocolate chip. They mean, I think, my round face and brown bead eyes. I keep count. I mind that I be good looking. I don't want to look like grandmother. Ah, Po, her likeness is the mask of tragedy. An ape weeps when another ape weeps. She is ancestress. She is prayed to. She sits, the queen, center of the family in China, center of the family portrait. My mother in it too, generations of in-laws around her. All is black and white, but for a dot of jade green at Po's ears and a curve of jade green at her wrist. Lotus lily feet show from the hem of her gown. She wanted to be a beauty. She lived to be 100. My mother lived to be 100. 103, she said. Chinese lie about their age, making themselves older. Or maybe she was 97 when the lady official from Social Security visited her, as the government visits everyone who claims a 100th birthday. Mama showed off. She pedaled her exercise bike, hammer-curled hot pink barbells, suddenly stopped. What if Social Security won't believe she's a century old? Here's a way for calculating age. Subtract from her age of death my age now. 100 minus 65 equals 35. I am 35 years to go. Lately, I've been writing a book a decade. I have time to write 3 more books. Jane Austen wrote 6 books. I've written 6 books. Hers are 6 big ones. Mine 4 big ones and 2 small ones. I take refuge in numbers. I waste my time with Sudoku. Day dawns, I am greedy, helpless to begin 6-star difficulty Sudoku. Sun goes down, I'm still stuck for that square that will let the numbers fly into place. What good am I getting out of this? I'm not stopping time, nothing to show for my expenditures, pure nothing. Okay, then I'm gonna skip. 7 days before my birthday, I had breakfast with Mary Gordon, who's always saying things I never thought before. It's capitalistic of us to expect any good from peace demonstrations, as if ritual has to have use, gain, profit. I agreed. Yes, it's Buddhist to go parading for the sake of parading. Can you think of a writer besides Chekhov who is holy and an artist? Grace Paley. She smiled. Well, yes, obviously. Thoreau. Oh no, Thoreau's too Protestant, tidy, non-sexual. He goes home to mom for hot chocolate. No sex, no tragedy, no humor. Come to think of it, Thoreau doesn't make me laugh. A line from Walden hangs over one of my desks. I love a broad margin to my life. Sitting here at this sidewalk cafe with Mary, deliberately taking time off from writing and teaching duties, I am making a broad margin to my life. The margin will be broader when we part and I am alone. Thoreau swam, then sat in the doorway of his shelter, large box, dwelling house, alone all the summer morning, wrapped in the sunlight and the trees and the stillness. Birds flitted through the house until by the sun falling in at my west window or the noise of some traveler's wagon on the distant highway, I was reminded of the lapse of time. I have a casita of my own, built instead of a garage after the big fire. Its width is the same as Thoreau's, 10 feet, its length a yard longer. He had a loft. I have a skylight. I want to be a painter. Sometimes I hear the freeway, now and again, the train and the campanile. Thoreau heard the band playing military music. His neighbors were going to war against Mexico. He made up his mind not to pay taxes. Okay, so I write that, and I don't know, is this a poem or is this prose put into lines? I think the nicest lines in there were Mary Gordon's, and she's sitting right there. So the good lines, Mary. So, and then there is a section of I love a broad margin to my life, and the other good line in it is I love a broad margin to my life, and Thoreau did that. But there is a little section in here that I do feel is a poem, and that is, I just feel that it's complete, even though it's just part of this one. Once I was on an airplane beside a village girl in the window seat. At takeoff, I asked her, "Where are you going?" "Why," she shouted in surprise and grabbed a hold of my hand. "You speak like me." "Yes, I speak Sayup language." "Are you from the village?" "No. My mama and baba came from Sayup villages. They left for New York. They lived in New York, then California. I was born in California." I feel like a child, younger than this girl. I'm telling about parents as if I still had them. I'm talking in my baby language. "Wah!" she exclaimed, loud as though yelling across fields. "I am going to New York. I am meeting my husband in New York. He's waiting for me in New York. He works in a restaurant. He's rented a home. He sent for me and waits for me." She did not let go of my hand. I held hers tightly as we flew the night sky. She looked in wonder at webs of lights below. "Red, red, green, green," she said. "Red, red, green, green," my mother used to say, meaning, "Oh, how pretty." The lights were white and yellow and gold, blue, copper, and above, stars and stars. "Mother, Mama, as you leave the village family you'll never see again." Grandfather walked her as far as he could walk, stood weeping in the road until she could not see him anymore. When she turned around to look, "She's off to that lonely country from where he returned broke." I felt that I was dying. "Mama, girl, you are not traveling alone. I am traveling with you, here, holding your hand. I know that country you're leaving for and shall guide you there. I know your future. I'm your child from the future. Your husband will certainly meet you. Baba will be at the East Broadway station. You will recognize each other, though he be dressed modern Western style. You will have a good, good life. You will have many children and live a long, long life. You will be lucky." "You are lucky. Your husband has work. He's rented an apartment and made you a home. He saves money. He bought your plane ticket. He will be waiting for you at the airport." She listened to the wise old woman teaching her. But how to instruct anyone the way to make an American life? How to have a happy marriage? For a long time in the dark, dozing, dreaming, thinking, we sat without speaking, without letting go of warm hands. The red, red, green, green appeared again. I told her, "That's Japan. We're over Japan now. We'll be landing soon in Narita." "Wow, you speak Japanese too." She admires me too much. Inside the horrible confusion of the international airport, how can a mind from the village not fall to crazy pieces? I found a nice American couple making the connecting flight to New York, and asked them, please, to take this Chinese girl to the right gate. She thanked me. She said goodbye. "See you again, Joy Kin." She did not look back. Good. Gotta go. Things to do, people to meet, places to be. Okay, so all this time, I worry about time a lot, and here I think in a way my worry is very Western, very American, to be thinking about time, and especially my time running out. And so then I thought about some of my poet ancestors, Li Po and Tu Fu. They had a very different sense of time. They were, and especially when it had to do with your writing, oh, this writing is taking forever, it's 10 years and it's still not over, and I'm still not done, and when I was younger, I'm doing all this work and I'll never get published. Those ancient poets would say, 1,000 years from now, my reader will come. That is a singular. My one reader will come. We're not talking about the bestseller list here. My reader will come. And and then they also thought of time as going in a circle. And so we are somebody else's reader that came, that wrote 1,000 years ago. We are somebody's reader, and maybe we caused them to come into being 1,000 years from now. Okay, so I try to say this like this. This has to do with a difference in thinking about cause and effect. What causes what? Well, okay, let me try it like this. The true poet crosses eternal distances. Perfect reader, come, though 1,000 years from now. Poem can also reach reader born 1,000 years before the poem, wished into being. Li Bai and Du Fu, lucky sea turtles, found each other within their lifetimes. Oh, the hopes of Chinese time and Chinese poets. Live in the turning and returning cosmos this way. An act of love I do this morning saves a life on a far future battlefield. And the surprising love I feel that saves my life comes from a person whose soul, somehow corresponding with my soul, doing me a good deed 1,000 years ago. I'm going to read those last few lines over again because I think they are so subtle and so abstract, and so unreal. Maybe if I read it again, it'll be more real and it'll come true. And that even the smallest gesture that I make in a peace demonstration, maybe that'll save somebody. Maybe it'll stop a war 100 years from now, but we don't know because it doesn't happen. An act of love I do this morning saves a life on a far future battlefield. And the surprising love I feel that saves my life comes from a person whose soul, somehow corresponding with my soul, doing me a good deed 1,000 years ago. You.
Go ahead, Marie.
Is this on? Okay. Well, first I have to say that you were such a huge influence on my life and my writing that it's a little bit surreal for me to be sitting here. And I wanted to. So the New York Times wrote about Woman Warrior. It said it burns the fat right out of my mind. And that's pretty much what reading it did for me. And so sort of on the behalf of some of my students, and I'm picking up on something you said about when you were writing it, that you had a Chinese American audience in mind. And I find that so fascinating, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the anxieties of young writers today, where a lot of people feel that if you write sort of ethnic that you're always going to be marginalized, and the whole goal is more to be universal. And in fact, but what's funny is I found this wonderful quote from Toni Morrison when she was interviewed, where she said, "What I'm interested in is writing without the gaze, without the white gaze. What interested me was the African American experience throughout whichever time I spoke of. It was always about African American culture and people, good, bad, and indifferent. But that was for me the universal." So I would just love to hear what your thoughts are on
The
that.
idea of the universal is also controversial, because there are people of color, minority people, who when they are writing the universal, then also the particular can disappear, and it's being co-opted or assimilated. So the universal voice could be like something very neutral, and so to write from a very particular place, if you look at the question another way, each of us is just one individual person, and we are also representative of all humanity, but the individual story is not like anybody else's. And I think the more particular you make it, the more interesting it is. And in that one paragraph, it's only when I wrote that paragraph that I was addressing Chinese Americans. And the other paragraphs, I also was thinking about everybody else. When I was writing The Woman Warrior, I knew there was nothing else like it, and I was ready that if it was not going to be published, that I would just keep copies, and it will be published after I die, and it could. People 100, 1,000 years from now. I really did believe about my reader. I hope for more than one, but it helped me a lot to write the way I write, which breaks through current politics. And I was worried about the book being merely reviewed as a feminist book. I didn't want to be in that box either.
But also the confidence. I guess what struck me so much was the confidence with which you just wrote everything, not just the ethnicity, but then I thought, oh, this is a memoir, but are you supposed to start with when you were born, or just that you mixed in all the folk tales? Just that was, you just kind of came out of the gate with this kind of singular voice. And even rereading it, I just was still so taken by its originality and its fierceness.
Well, I wasn't very confident, though. It really isn't just coming out of the gate. It was. I did begin when I was. My mother says 9 months old, and I was talking story, making up poems, and then a little bit older, just writing short stories and novels and diaries, and it was continuous writing for 35 years before and The Woman Warrior was just part of that. And so I just took it out of the continuous writing that I was already doing. So I know a lot of the critics would just say it came out of nowhere, but I'd already been practicing for 3 decades.
I wonder if we can if actually when you started reading from The Woman Warrior, addressing Chinese Americans, that was exactly the question I was going to ask you. Because in 1977, I bought this book the minute I arrived in California. And historically, I think I am old enough to remember that the Asian American movement was piggybacking on the civil rights movement. And it was a very, very young kind of subjectivity. It was a very young identity that was alien to many people. So I think that at the time, the call for Asian Americans, and also in a broader sense, the call for Chinese Americans and the call for Asian Americans, really serve a historical purpose in conjuring up a brand new identity that we now know we can also inhabit, other than being nobody. So I wonder, now almost 40 years later, has that changed? And do you think that your work definitely contributed a great deal to that awareness? But do you think that you and your readers are at a different place now, whereby that ethnicity doesn't have to be so prominently marked, as Marie kind of hinted, that maybe something more universal, more American?
As you're talking, I realized that when I wrote that, Chinese Americans, and I asked a question, I now remember that I felt that I was making up a new word because we were Orientals, and there wasn't. We would say we are Chinese, or we would say I'm an American, but we didn't have that. It was. It was around, but I remember thinking I am saying something very new as I use those words together. Your question about, one thing I did feel about The Woman Warrior, all the characters in it are Chinese and Chinese Americans. And by the time I was writing Tripmaster Monkey, I don't live in that kind of world. I mean, my friends and everybody, my family are all different races. And so when I was writing Tripmaster Monkey, you know how you're writing a novel, but you're also doing the theory as you're going along, and I thought I'm going to write a global novel. I'm going beyond the great American novel, and in the global novel there are people from all over the world. They speak all kinds of languages and different dialects, and they mix it up, and so yeah. But at the same time, each one is still very individual.
Yeah, and very, very ethnically marked still.
Yeah.
I'd just like to ask you a craft question, because I'm always trying to actually get my students to write by hand, which is becoming so obsolete or strange to them. And I would just like to hear about what your process is like, your physical process, and if it's changed over the years.
I have about, I think, 15 beautiful fountain pens, and some are gold, and some are platinum, and some are very, very expensive, and some are not, and I think it's very important to write by hand, because you are actually using your entire body. The surrealists used to find freedom by holding their pen or pencil on the paper and keep moving. And you do not lift that you do not lift your pencil off the page, and see what comes, and it is a freedom. When I was a kid, I was so thrilled by the people who wrote with quill pens, and so we used to raise turkeys in our backyard, and I took those turkey feathers and I made quill pens and wrote with them, and then I found a peacock feather. And it didn't quite work, so I stuck a ballpoint pen into the thing, and then I'm writing, and the feather is flying all over, and when you think about it, our ancestors wrote with feathers and they wrote with hair, you know, and bristles. They wrote with hair and feathers, and if we did that, you know, we'd be garnering all that energy too. My process is that I start with pencil, because with a pencil you don't have to commit to anything. You can write really light, and then you can press down, and so you get all kinds of dimensions. And then I put it in ink, and then it's the first rewriting stage before I type it or put it on the computer.
Wonderful. That's how a Chinese calligrapher writes as well, right? Mm-hmm. In one sitting without lifting.
Yes,
without breaking.
Yes, and you do all the words at the one sitting, and you can't correct.
And rip it off. I have another question, maybe changing the subject a little bit, because I think that I would love to hear what your readers have to say. And that came from your, I love the board margin to my life. When you are talking about, or when you're contemplating whether you want to kill off Whitman Ah Sing, right there, just end his misery instead of, you know, kind of following him, you know, watching him, you know, go to another alien village. And you said something really, really profound about the difference between creating a male character from creating a female character. You said Whitman Ah Sing was able to, like, you know, male characters, was able to enter many places in this world that a man is allowed and a lady is not. So you said that, you know, it's too hard to kill him off because he's useful. He can, you know, open our eyes. But I said, wow, isn't that a perfect statement of female limitations and constraint that we still find in this world, in our culture? So do you really mean it? Do you really find it easier to write a male character?
No, I find it easier to write a female character. Because the female character, I just go inside and I know everything. And I wrote Tripmaster Monkey because I thought that was a great artistic challenge, that see whether I could, I think a writer can be very selfish and egocentric if you just go I, and then I'm writing about women, and so I wanted to be more able to write about the other, and I saw that as a great feat to write a man. So that part is it's a. It came from hearing like, oh, Tolstoy can write a woman, but you never hear of a woman writing about a man. So I thought, okay, I can do that. And but I thought it was in writing Tripmaster Monkey, I thought that men had much more interesting and exciting lives, especially since they were getting drafted, and so they get to go to war, and they have to, and they have all these existential choices where a woman's life is not so interesting, and so that was why I did that.
So you have to give her dreams and fantasies.
Oh, to give her dreams and fantasies.
In order to make women characters interesting?
Oh, no. I think the women have adventures too. I'm just talking about certain attitudes I had when I was working. And then I get these attitudes, and then I write it out, and then I don't have them anymore.
we open up for questions now? Because I bet people have a lot of questions. There's the mic set up.
Thanks for coming. This has been great. I read Chinaman in high school, and I have a question. So this is really exciting because in my California history class, we read the chapter, The Grandfather of the Sierra Nevada Mountains, and you have some wonderful metaphors in there. But we were curious if when he was hanging in baskets, if that was also metaphorical or if that was true.
I heard it as talk story, and so much that's mythic comes in that tradition. And I also remember reading about that in China and in Malaysia, there would be these baskets that hung down and to collect bird nests for bird nest soup, birds that lived along the cliffs, and saying this is a way that they could also do construction or build things. And then I went to the Railroad Museum in Sacramento, and there is a statue of somebody coming down in a basket. But then I think, did they get that from me, or did they find it historically? Okay, right now, Stanford University is putting together the history of the railroad, and they have and looking through documents and whatever they could find, they have decided that this is a myth, that there were not baskets. And so I don't know. So there we are.
Okay, thanks.
Hi. Last semester I was doing a little bit of research about Asian American identity and how it's constructed, and I stumbled across sort of a ongoing debate between you and Frank Chin back in the day. And I remember when I was reading, there was a lot of stuff sort of about Frank Chin and what he did to construct the Chinese American identity, and not very much about what Chinese American women writers were doing to construct sort of a Chinese American identity in writing. And I've sort of found that to be the case in general, which is that Asian American women, Chinese American women get left out of sort of a telling of the history of the movement. And I was wondering if I could sort of hear your thoughts or experiences about that.
Oh, I'm surprised that that you say that, because what I understand from Frank Chin's criticism is that the women are defining the culture. They are the ones that are doing the writing. There's me and Amy Tan and Gish Jin and Amy Liu, and it's all women. And there were not the men that were. The men were not writing, and so I think that was his complaint. And then he goes along. Then he also says that we're emasculating them, and that's why they can't do it, and so on.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you so much. It was such a treat to hear you go through your work. That story about you losing your novel in the fire puts the fear of God into me every time I think about it, and I'm just curious now, do you back up to the cloud, or has that experience changed the way you work? Do you have regret about it, or did it end up being a gift? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, it surprised me that when the work was lost in the fire, that I could not go back and rewrite it. It was because writing is always going into the new. You're always experimenting, and to just go back and try to remember I think it would just dull the whole thing. And so I began over again, and I just started on something entirely different, and the book that burned in the fire was fiction, and after the fire, I didn't want to do fiction. I wanted to express my own pain and agonies, and I did not want to care about these fictional people that I made up, and I returned to the primal kind of writing that I did as a child, which was, if I wanted to cry or make noises, I just do it that way. So that's some of the consequences of that. Oh, also I think that I'm even more aware that I have no time, and that my work can disappear at any time. And yeah, I do back it up, but I don't believe it. I had it backed up before, and then that part burns, and that part burns, and
Thank you so much for being here. So I just recently completed my senior thesis, and even though it was a relatively short process, I feel like writing a project like that felt like such an exercise in self-loathing and also
self-loathing.
Yeah, and so it really amazes me when you talk about how you worked on these books for 10 years at a time. So I'm wondering what your relationship to failure has been and how it's changed, and also what your relationship to the project is as you evolve. Also,
my relationship to failure. I've never thought about that.
Don't take her word for it. Tracy is super, super brilliant.
No. Thank you so much for
Failure and self-loathing. Is it a feeling that you have indulged yourself too much by spending all that time on this piece of work? I do feel that here's the way I feel. Like I do all this writing day after day and decade after decade, and when do I get to come to the party? When do I get a day off? And neglecting my family, neglecting my friends. And so as I'm older now, I try to write less and spend more time with people.
Thank you.
Hi. I finished your book today, To Be a Poet, and one of your observations, it seems like you can't see poetry from a negative point of view. For you, poetry only can be about positive, beautiful feelings. And you had a very interesting process that someone taught you about how to write a poem. So I like to write poetry myself, and that's my question, because I also find inspiration in pain and sadness, and I guess other writers in Latin American, like Gabriel Garcia Lorca, or have written very painful poems. And they are magnificent. So is that related to the Buddhist background, or where does it come from? And because many poets have committed suicide and things like that. So poetry, sometimes I view it as a dangerous, I guess, vulnerable profession. The poets expose ourselves too much. So I just wanted to hear a little bit about that. And that was one question. So I have another one, but...
Let me do that one first. I want to tell you that I was having dinner with Bob Hass, Brenda Hillman, and Gary Snyder. And the idea had just come to me that here I am this workhorse prose writer, and this is hard. And I just sat there and, I want to be poets like you. And because, poetry is so fast and easy and happy. And the three of them just looked at me. And Gary Snyder, he doesn't even deign to talk to me. But Brenda was saying, how can you say that? Life is tragic. So, okay, yeah, it's tragic, but I'm gonna write happy poems. And, I was just at the Met yesterday looking at the paintings. I am very attracted to pretty, and I know that's shallow, and but I like pretty.
Me too. That sometimes, like, poets have to take a break, or because it depends. It's all about emotions. So I guess whatever affects you that day, it could be good, it could be bad, but both can produce great poetry, which I've read both sides of the equation. Sylvia Plath, and so you can. But yeah, you can dig down if you. So I prefer beautiful art as well. But and maybe I had another question.
Maybe since there are two people behind you, maybe we can go to them first, if you don't mind. Thank you.
I'm really fascinated with the way in which historical themes bounce around from culture to culture. So I was really struck when you talked about Mulan as being both Odysseus and Penelope. But then you went on to mention another story in which Fa Mulan's father was lamenting the idea of a son who would go off and die in a foreign land, whereas a daughter would stay home. And it leapt out to me that that's Achilles and his father, and it's Priam, Hector's father, who finally redeems Achilles' anger by making him think of his father, who longs for his son dying in the foreign land. And you're so interested in peace, and you've written about war, and I'm just wondering if you have a sense that the intertwining of peace and war are these really large, permanent historical themes.
First of all, that was not Fa Mulan's father. That was Du Fu writing about some other people. But I guess the best way to answer it is the Buddhist idea of non-duality, war and peace, war and peace.
Thank you.
Hello. I read The Warrior Woman in high school, and one passage always stuck with me, and I hope this isn't too specific, but in one passage, I think you're a child, and I guess going against your pacifist convictions now, there's another girl who you can affront in the bathroom, and something about her quietness or mousiness frustrates you, so you start to pinch her cheeks and pull her hair, and I was just wondering if there's anything more you could say about that, what you felt in that moment, and why you might have chose to include it in the book when you did.
In a way, that scene is one of the longest ones in the book, maybe the longest, and I put it at the climactic part of the book, and it is simply two girls, or a bully, and the victim in grammar school. A very simple child's story, and yet in it is war and peace, and it is As I say in the book, that is the worst thing I'd ever done. I mean,
Sorry, bring it up
so
now.
I thought, okay, let me put it in there. I think nowadays, they are also fighting being silent and having a voice, and so that is. People being silent and having a political voice. It's also a writer who is silent or has something to say. So all those struggles are going on. Okay, so this is something that happened in 1952, and I am surprised that I meet children, grammar school children, or I meet teachers who tell me that there are these silent girls in their class, and it's still happening. So that we still have to learn the voices, or how to teach somebody how to speak, and not just bullying them into talking.
Thank you.
The same problem. I want to say that I read Woman Warrior in 1977 as a teenager and had a profound effect on me. I was just involved in an exhibit at the New York Historical Society on Chinese American exclusion in history. And we put Woman Warrior actually in a display case as part of the exhibit.
Nice.
But I mean, it really, and I've spoken to a lot of women, Chinese American women in my generation, and we always come back to Woman Warrior, and we talk about how it validated our experiences and also allowed us to feel that we could carve our own path and be ourselves. And I was curious because, we share a similar background, Hoisan and all of that, and laundries. Was the book ever translated in Chinese, and what was the reception of that book in China, and particularly from the area where our families originated?
Oh, there are many editions in China. The first one was pirated, and so pirated translations are done very quickly and without using new forms and experimental language. And so I think those early editions were, they were like soap operas. And my parents read them, and my mother thought it was great. And she said, "Oh, how did you know this is so accurate?" And I was so relieved because she doesn't, the anger isn't in there. And so she doesn't know. And then there was another edition, and this is for Chinamen, Tripmaster Monkey also, it was translated in the North, and so it had the standard Beijing Mandarin language, and then there were some people from Canton at Canton University, and they said, "No, it's obvious from your English that you are writing a Southern dialect." And so they translated it again using a Southern dialect. I didn't even know that the written language could be different from the North and the South. I think the vocabulary could be different, but I didn't know that there was a difference. So they've done it both those ways. In China, they use my Chinese name, which is Tong Ting Ting, and so they don't even know about my American name. It's all under this other name, and so it's really nice. There's a completely different reputation and name over there.
That's great. Your poor husband.
Oh! I got to tell you one more thing about the Chinese. coming out of the Cultural Revolution, they destroyed everything. They destroyed the feudal, classical stuff. They destroyed modern things. So culture was just wiped out. And then coming out of the Cultural Revolution, they were thinking, how are we going to paint? They had broken all the pianos and the violins and everything. So what kind of music are we going to do? And then how are we going to write? What kind of novels? What kind of poetry? And I was there in China at some literary events, and they were saying, they complimented me on being able to be free. So I wasn't in the Cultural Revolution. I wasn't in China. So I was free in America to write anything I wanted. And so maybe this way that I was writing, which they call magical realism, and they said maybe that's the way to go. And so my work was sort of guiding them toward what to do after the Cultural Revolution. I see you nodding your head. Not. You don't think it's magical realism?
No, I thought that magical realism could only exist in the country at least the anthropologists said that. It's like, say, down in South America.
Mm-hmm.
So there were some writers in Spain that were writing magical realism. There is no culture of magical realism in Spain. And so this is
Oh, here's the way I think about that. In Latin America, with magical realism, you have layers. So here's the most primitive or original layer, which is the Incan and Mayan myths and stories. And then on top of that, we have Catholicism. And then on top of that, we have science. And so a magical realism book would take in consideration all of that. And so if we use the same idea about China, you have the ancient myths and stories. And then comes the modern history. And then comes science, and then their wild idea that we're going to have a cultural revolution, and we're going to overthrow and change all of that, from the deepest myths all the way up to science, and so the new novel would have to take into consideration all those layers, and I think that's what they mean by magical realism. And don't forget, here's a whole culture that had ghosts and demons and angels and yeah.
I think that it's getting quite late, so maybe Eileen, would you like to?